It's lovely to be here. Really lovely to be in the company with Anne and Fintan and Margaret. What we thought we'd do, just to be a little bit different, to mix things up, is try a sort of call and response reading. And there's Margaret's, there's a preface, prefacing her selected poems is a quote by the American poet Jane Kenyon. And she says that one of the functions of poetry is to keep alive the memory of the people, places, and events that shape us. So with this in mind, I thought we'd create a type of call and response between us around these aspects of people, places, and events which have shaped us as writers. So we'll be responding to these themes, people, places, and events, but if we wish, we may respond to some of the topics that may come up in the poems that have been read previously. So it's a sort of structured improvisation, if you like. So each of us will read two poems each, going through those. So starting with people first, and I'm going to begin with a poem from my debut collection, my first collection, which is called Silent Music. It came out in 2011, so quite a long time ago now. And this poem was written, around probably 2005, 2006, and it's called Google Earth, and it was about going on the computer program for the first time. And I was with my partner, and she had recently, we met in Africa, in Southern Africa, and then she came back to Ireland. She's Irish, but we were staying with a friend in London. And earlier in the day, we went to the Globe Theatre, and come in, don't worry, it's just late. Earlier in the day, we went to the Globe Theatre, and then we went on this computer programme in this house in Streatham Common. And while we were on the computer programme, I opened up a Midsummer. I bought one of those little, like, Matchbox size editions, purple leather-bound edition of Midsummer Night's Dream. And I opened up the play, as you do when you're on Google Earth, and my eyes fell on this quote from Theseus, where he says, "The poet's eye, in fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven." So that set the ball rolling for this poem, Google Earth. We started in Africa, the world at our fingertips, dropped in on your house in Zimbabwe, threading our way north out of Harare into the suburbs, magnifying the streets, the forms of things unknown, till we spotted your mum's white Mercedes parked in the driveway, seeming more strange than true, the three of us huddled round a monitor in Streatham. You pointed out the swimming pool and stables. We whizzed out, looking down on our blue planet, then, like gods, zoomed in towards Ireland, taking the road west from Cork to Kinsale, following the Bandon River through Inishannon, turning off and leapfrogging over farms to find our home framed in fields of barley. Enlarged the display to see our sycamore's leaves waving back. Then, with the touch of a button, we were smack bang in central London, tracing our footsteps earlier in the day, walking the wobbly bridge between St Paul's and Tate Modern, the London Eye staring majestically over the Thames. South through Brixton into Streatham, one sees more devils than vast hell can hold, the blank expressions of millions of roofs gazing squarely up at us, while we made our way down the avenue, as if we were trying to sneak up on ourselves, till there we were, right outside the door, the lunatic, the lover, and the poet, peeping through the computer screen like a window to our souls. So we're responding to, actually, that kind of had everything in it, people, places, and events. So the next poem is called Dad. And it goes like this. And I wrote this. This is one of those poems that kind of came out that I was coming back from a Bob Dylan, Radiohead concert in Dublin, in Cork, and it was one of those really wet Sunday nights coming home, probably a bit hungover. And I always used to feel sad on Sundays. And I didn't really know why, and I suppose there may be obvious reasons for that, because of people going back to work or back to school and that sort of thing. But there was this kind of deep melancholy I had, and then I wrote this poem, and one of those poems that kind of came out in one go, and I didn't really change it very much. And it was a very cathartic thing, and it's amazing, like poetry, I think, it has the power to sort of not just name an emotion, but to sort of pinpoint an emotion, but also that cathartic release. And then, so after I wrote this poem anyway, that sort of, those Sunday blues went away. So this is called Dad. I'll always remember those Sunday drives home, how a blackening silence came over us for the night. I'd look back at the road we'd set out on when our weekend had begun, singing songs, stopping at petrol stations in the back of Beyond, turning off the beaten track and finding a pub for lunch with swings and climbing frames to play on. But all that was fading fast, as signs marked the dwindling miles. Oncoming headlights dazzled us, the final cat's eyes blinked past, and the road emptied, losing its nerve as we curved off the motorway. Then the real darkness set in, the chill of parting making me numb. I'd run upstairs to my room without a word spoken, and from the corner of my window watch your silver Citroen slip into the night. A final sliver of light, then total eclipse. Another week of staring into space in classrooms, waiting for our next outing all together. Save Mum. And now I'm going to hand you over to Anne, A.M.
Cousins. My cousins, my relatives. Now I'm going to respond to something that Adam read there. I had something planned, but I'm going to do something else because this one is about my father, and it's also about naming places. I noticed you named lots of places in your first one. This is about a little bit like a Google Drive from the hospital in Waterford down to Kilmore and coming along the New Line Road. And it's also a journey. It was my father's last journey. It was very important in 2017 to get him home from hospital so that he could die at home. This happens with a lot of older people, probably, that want to be in their own bed. And this was his last journey. Ambulance. I never thought it would come to this. You in a hospital bed, fast asleep on a bedpan, your penance for calling the nurse too many times. And us ducking and diving, hiding in shadows to watch while you slept, wiping your face when you wept. We smuggled in sweet contraband to spoon feed our darling man. Dishes of semolina, creamy and sweet, stewed apples with magical properties. And that last journey homewards in November, a rough ride on the car ferry to Ballyhack, the painful climb to Arthurstown, your stretcher bed rattling along the new line from the mountain of Forth to the old barony of Bargy, past the crosses in the Skioch, the cemetery gates with their fresh white paint, down the road to Balask, and the welcome crackle of tyres on your neat gravelled yard. And you saw none of this, only the insides of your eyelids, the ambulance ceiling, and my brother's gentle face. They wheeled your stretcher in and shut the front door behind you. That's that one. And I read one then about people again. In 2016, when everyone was celebrating all their ancestors that had done heroic things, I noticed that none of my ancestors had done anything heroic. Not that we know of, because they were all really busy. The men were just ploughing with horses. And the women were busy raising families. And I knew that there were some women from Wexford who had done incredible things. There were the Ryan women from Tomcool, and one of whom was Min Ryan, that the park is called after. And then there was Una Brennan from Enniscorthy. Una was one of the women who raised the flag over Enniscorthy, and she was the mother of Maeve Brennan. And so I started thinking about my four mothers, Maggie, Mary Ann, Lizzie, and Ellen, and what they were at in 1916. Four mothers, 1916. During that Irish spring, my four mothers were busy, no time to spare for rebellion. Maggie Keating survived the last of her 16 confinements, struggled to her knees and gave thanks for a breathing child. 3 miles away at Hill Kilturk, Mary Ann Cousins smelled the bloom of consumption on her boy's breath and knew the worst was still to come. Lizzie Moore found the May bush adorned with ribbons and gold sovereigns, a proclamation of love from Doyle the baker. And poor Ellen French, under a mound in Amberstown, labour and care done forever, never heard the news that on a glorious Easter day, the Ryan girls from Tom Cool concealed dispatches in their corsets and risked all for freedom, while Una Brennan, pale and faint with morning sickness, took the train to Enniscorthy to fly the new flag of Éire over the town. My foremothers were keeping house, keeping watch, keeping faith, hoping there would be something left for them when they looked up from their work.
A person that influenced practically all my writing was Dennis Collins. He was the artistic director of the Art Centre in Wexford. And my first serious attempts at writing began with the workshop that he gave. Up to that time, I would have scribbled with some journaling and writing of prose. And Dennis was setting different exercises. And he spoke about poetry, you know. And I came up with write poems, they told me. Concise and direct. We are sure that is what you would do best. Concise, I replied, but to ask for a smoke takes me 500 words more or less, you know. And on in that kind of a rubbishy way, you know. And then he said, write a sonnet. And the others in the class responded properly to these things. My sonnet began, a lady fair of form and dark of hue, the quill of will extolled in sonnets sweet. A noble lord he serenaded to, and raged through page and page against time's fleet feet, and so on. There's a full sonnet there. I was sent home with my tail between my legs and told to come back the next day with the next week with a proper sonnet. And the result was a sonnet for the Bossman, which was our name for my father. And when the book came out, then it said, that has got to go on the first page of your book. Sonnet for the Bossman. To some, those tasks seemed menial, not to you. You clearly savoured each swing of the scythe through yielding grass, and every plant you grew immersed you in the flow of nature's tide. Your life's work, though, was broader far in scope. For us, you wanted all you had and more, to be at one with nature and to hope for something sensed beyond the mortal shore. The word philosophy you never knew or used, yet lived and taught one all your life, that every man had worth, and all that grew or lived on earth had value beyond price. Now, when I pause before a sloe or haw, I murmur thank you for your gift of awe. And my first few poems were structured like that, but I learned to write in free form as well. And another person that had an influence on me was a spinster lady who lived down the road. She'd nursed her parents to death, and she lived on a small state income. And she used to pass by our house on her way to the Bog Lane, which we called the lane just up the road from our house. And she'd gather firewood there. And at night, she used to unravel jumpers and things like that, and use the curly wool that she got from that to stitch into probably sacking, maybe that size, and made mats with them. And she had frames made for photographs out of players' cigarette packs, just a pack of 10 cigarettes. You cut around the life buoy, there's a life buoy with a sailing frame. You cut it a certain way and you insert them one after another, like a pack of cards, and you get a circular frame for photograph. And the rest will be revealed and should be self-explanatory. Chestnut Cottage. In her cottage with its back to the sun, she spent her life in shadow. The big chestnut tree and overgrown hedges green the gloomy front. Sometimes I'd pause and lean upon my hurl to watch her plodding home, a bark of firewood tied up in a rope and carried on her back, the harvest of a day down the bog lane. In her dim kitchen, sitting by the fire, she ripped old woolens, jumpers, socks and scarves to weave a blue and red and yellow mat which warmed my waking feet. The present she endured more than enjoyed, but sometimes could be coaxed into the past. Successful parish teams adorned her walls, and having no relations of her own, she took delight in mine, proudly pointing out my uncles and the boss. They hung around the paint-sealed window in a cigarette box frames with pictures of the Cayley band that once used practice there when she would play the box in younger, brighter days. Often the gloom outside came in, and not just to the kitchen. Then the door would stay shut. We'd keep an eye on the chimney, leave firewood in the yard and groceries at the gate. Years later, when that chimney showed no smoke, I broke a paint-sealed window to get in, thinking as I picked her from the floor how light she was who once had been so tall.
And welcome Margaret Galvin.
Anne spoke about her foremothers and the work they did keeping house. And I want to introduce you to my mother, who died in 1983. And like a lot of her women of her generation, she had this epic commitment to thrift. And this was expressed through this painfully faithful collection of green shield stamps. Yes?
Sorry, just
Were
hold
we?
on for a minute, Margaret. I want to try and get that noise switched off.
Thanks very much. Okay, okay. A bit of competition.
As the elevator music. That's gone, is it? Are we going to have to stop every time it comes back?
Is it gone? It's not there or anything. Okay, as I was saying, women of her generation had this epic commitment to thrift and this. Oh, good God, I do hear it now.
How are you there? You might want to. Can you bring your chairs in because you can't see Margaret anyway? I wonder if that would help.
There's a chair over here.
Because you're not affected by the sound this side, are you? I can't really hear it.
No,
No.
I think it's supposed to be a heavy duty vacuum. I think.
All right. Knock them on the head.
Now I think we can go.
Okay, right, third time. The collection of green shield stamps was so central to women of her era, you know, and they were collected with such painful fidelity. And you needed this monumental amount of stamps to get something like a bloody saucepan, you know. And, you know, she would collect these for bed linen and candlewick bedspreads, and then what would be done with them? They'd be put up in the bloody loft in a suitcase for good, you know, because I don't know, does anybody keep anything for good now, or is there a good time? And on the one hand, it seemed so poignant that all the good stuff, so painfully procured, was preserved. And on the other hand, I think she was probably onto a very good thing, that as in keeping hope alive, because she would be saying, you never know who might be coming. Now, we were Chekhovian in looking out for this person who would be coming, you know, and they would assume something in our imagination. Whoever they were going to get good cups and good bed linen, So my mother hopes for the best. My mother would pause in her sweeping and lean on the brush to listen when Bridie Gallagher's voice trilled from the wireless. Her sentimental lilt filling the kitchen with moonlight in Mayo. My mother sang along with the same musing air I noticed when, twice a year, the good tea set was taken from the dresser. Bone china delf, white, rimmed with red roses to be washed in suds. 30 pieces, all intact. Something entire and unbroken in her unlikely possession. Tableware preserved for some elusive best occasion. She was all set for some vague, beyond the horizon possibility of a visitor. A capable hostess, ready to entertain that same exotic someone who'd sleep between the flannelette sheets, still in cellophane in the trunk in the loft, with a candlewick bedspread ridged with roses, saved for with endless books of Green Shield stamps, her epic commitment to thrift. We too must have hoped for this best time when someone connected to us would pass triumphant and grand through our door. Someone you couldn't expect to drink from a mug, or tighten themselves into a ball for heat under a pile of old coats on the bed. So, there you have it. And the next person in my illustrious line, as you were saying, Anne, my uncle Mick Galvin. Poor Mick was the most self-effacing, timid, gentle human being you could find, and the poor devil went to a concert in the parish hall and bought a ticket for the raffle. Now, winning a raffle, generally a good thing. To a man with Mick's shyness, it must have been mortifying. And he couldn't bring himself to claim the prize, right? And the prize was a tea set. And as a child, this story would be told, poor Mick and all the rest of it. And on the one hand, yes, I was there listening. I was thinking, wasn't it an awful thing to be so embarrassed about yourself, And on the other hand, I used to be cursing him. Sure, if he didn't want it, couldn't he have given it to us, But the tea set never materialised. The poor gentleman, the man who won the raffle. Too shy and mortified to claim the tea set. The first prize in the raffle at the parish concert hall. The pale blue ticket darkened with the sweat in his pan when the number was announced again and again, and people shuffled and looked around for the winner. The timid man who couldn't bear to call out and wave the little paper slip of victory. He'd sooner face a rat in the shed than walk to the stage to collect the crockery. The women in the kitchen serving the teas, talking about him, ribbing him about inviting some nice girl over for a cuppa. Now he had the equivalent. Jibing as he wobbled into the night. The big awkward box of ware yoked to the carrier of his bicycle, and he fearing he'd lose his balance.
Lovely.
Thanks so much, Margaret. So now we're going to move on to, well, we're supposed to move on to places. But actually, just to sort of pick up on Margaret's poems, kind of staying in that kitchen, I thought I'd read this poem first. It's called The World, and it's about someone, well, my mother, who has OCD, which is only sort of, we all knew she had it for many years, but she now tells us that she has it, as if we didn't know. But it's, I guess, on another, so it has that sort of difficulty perhaps of what comes with that. It's very interesting OCD because it's a ritualistic behaviour. And I heard a psychologist the other day say there's one defining thing about Western culture is that we have no formal ritual left. And somebody else said that ritual is myth in action, which I really liked. Ritual is myth in action. But also this poem, I suppose, touches on other themes of kind of prenatal or postnatal memory, which can be, so it could be seen as an attempt to recross this boundary to get back to the source, which, according to embryologists, is said to be the source of many creation myths from religions around the world, but you don't have to worry about that. The world. My mother's kitchen was a sea of blue cupboards and shiny surfaces. The door was always closed or just ajar. Sometimes I'd peep in and spot her dusting packets on shelves or mopping the floor smooth as an ice rink. A pot of wilting thyme sat, dying of thirst on the windowsill, while outside a bare hedge ringed our home, fortifying us from next door. When I asked for water, she'd startle out of her cleaning waltz, spin on the spot, then take a polished glass from the highest cupboard and dash to the taps. I'd catch her twisted image bending in its chrome arm, letting the gush of water run cold before filling the glass. I'd stand at the door, wanting to break through its icy exterior, the sea of glass, but knew if I did, the world would shatter. And now moving on to places, somewhere completely different. So this is that was from this second book of mine, second collection called The Art of Dying, and a lot of it's to do with sort of metamorphosis, and it's more sort of, there are literal deaths in it. I lost my father while I was writing this, and a sort of deputy dad, surrogate parent, and a dear old poet friend of mine called Desmond O'Grady, who lived in Kinsale, who was a rogue from Limerick, a great character who played himself in Fellini's La Dolce Vita, and was a fascinating character, one of those characters you won't see again. But anyway, and yeah, prefacing this collection, I have quotes from Carl Jung, who I'm mad on, and he says, "Everything that lives must pass through many deaths." So this is a true story as well. It's called Girl with a Bag in Barcelona, and anyone who's been to Barcelona may recognise some of the events that take place. Hopefully not. What was in the bag of the girl who had just arrived in Barcelona? She sat down on a bench and unfolded a piece of paper that contained the address of her final destination. At the moment of her taking out a cigarette and assisting a passerby with a light, another man leaned over and placed his hand on her bag, taking it away so simply, I assumed he was a friend playing a joke, until he broke into a bolt and the passer-by turned cold as he ran after his accomplice, flicking the cigarette over his shoulder that sparked a trail before going out. By the time I'd shot up and shouted, "Thieves!" they were halfway across Plaza de Catalunya, disappearing among the throng on La Rambla. The girl didn't move and went on smoking like nothing had happened, as if she didn't care, taking long draws on her cigarette. Perhaps there was nothing of value in the bag, a magazine, toothbrush, tampons, dirty underwear. On the other hand, perhaps her stillness was a sign that there were items of overwhelming cost, legal documents, her great-grandmother's watch, a diamond ring, a signed copy of Ulysses, first edition. "Should I call the police?" I asked, sitting back down. She gave a shrug that showed the futility of my question. She seemed to have complete self-control. I thought she might be a pupil of the mysterious Tibetan school who acquire material possessions only so they can let them go, to learn the art of dying, slipping away quietly between thoughts when no one is looking. The thieves, by now, had been swallowed into the underbelly of Barry Gotif, prizing open their booty like ravens scrapping over roadkill. The bag, the cigarette, the moment, snatched like a loose thought tossed to one side, while high above the muddy streets, behind the velvet curtained sky, a satellite spun out of orbit.
Talk about ritual and dying and living and all that. We have lots of rituals to get us into the world and out of the world. And the film Dead Man Walking, one of the things that I don't think I saw the whole thing. I saw a documentary about the nun, Sister Jean, who used to go into the prisons because her thing was that when somebody was being executed, no matter how bad a person was, she felt that as they left this world, they should have a face of love, and she was that face of love. So I'm going to, sorry now that I'm kind of bringing everybody down a bit here. I'll read something happy in a minute, but anyway. When a young guard was shot in 2013 and left to die in a car park up outside a credit union in Lordship, that was what struck me. He had nobody with him. And I wrote this poem. It was the second poem I wrote. And it was hoping that some of his ancestors would come, the spirits of his ancestors would come, and that they would be with him to take him from the world. Tarmac, for Garda Adrian Donoghue, 1971 to 2013. When death was a sacrament and needed to lie down on a feather bed with cool white sheets and a quilt made from the remnants of your great aunt's tea dresses, there was a candle, blessed and holy, steadied in your hand by a neighbour, sacred oils, and extra unction, a litany of saints and martyrs to light, to guard, to guide you, and tears on a face of love. And so, when smoke and badness billowed from a car window, when the shotgun's snout slid out to answer the policeman's knock, tell me that the old ones climbed the stile or slipped through the bars of the gate, rustled their way up the hill and along the road in their sepia gowns and wedding suits to kneel on the wet tarmac, to cradle your head, to hold your hand, and to look on your face with love. I'll read for you. Anybody who has had teenage children and they go out at night and you think they're never going to come back, and you do all kinds of things. You set the clock for 2:00 and you ring them and say, you're having a good night, and you hope they'll say, no, please come and get me up. And then when all of that doesn't work, you get up and you go out in the night and you put a raincoat on top of your nightdress and you drive around the town down to, what's that place called, Stores. You sit outside the stores at 2:15 was good time. And I wrote this, I think it's a villanelle, isn't it? And this kind of repeats. I've already forgotten now. But yeah, so there's a certain amount of repetition in the lines, and it's about my long green Mac, and I have it at home because I'm saving it for that daughter for when her children are going to nightclubs, and then she can wear it over her nightdress. Mac. The nights she went out and didn't come back, Fridays and Saturdays downtown, disco nights, I'd wake in the dark hours, put on my Mac. The long green one, she said, looked like a sack and would give the dogs in the street a fright, which never bothered me. But if she didn't come back from the edge of disaster, that hungry black abyss that lay in wait for our daughter might have eaten her up. So I got out of bed and put on my Mac over my nightdress and slipped out the back, drove round town in the middle of the night because I'd have died if she hadn't come back. Little girls staggered past, addled and racked by vodka and shots, boys coked up, ready for a fight, as I waited in the car, guardian angel in a Mac, to drive her and her friends to Burger Mac or abracadabra, whatever it took to finish the night. That's what I did, and that's how I got her back. driving round in my nightdress and the long green Mac.
Thanks, something that I wasn't going to read, but spurred on or whatever, by Anne's Villanelle. I'll read a Villanelle that I wrote also for my father. And it relives a day when I was trying to lead a pony through drills while he held the grubber, which shuffled the weeds from between the drills and loosened the soil a bit. And the pony wasn't, it was a newcomer to us. For years he'd had the use of the Slida horse that was left in Maidlass. Maidlass was an out farm of the Slida farm, and we could use that horse, and Paddy was a slow, stable horse.
A quiet out slob, Fintan.
Yeah, and a terrible pun there, stable horse. Anyway, but the Germans bought Slida, and they wanted to have what do you call it? A horse, a trap. They wanted to be brought around the place in a horse and trap, and they bought a skewbald pony, which was half mad. And Dad tried to work with him. And this tells one of the days. Villanelle for my father. The two were etched against the midday sun. The horse reared in revolt against the man. So close it seemed that horse and man were one. He'd given the reins over to his son, while through potato drills the grubber ran. The two were etched against the midday sun. The lines, straight as the barrel of a gun, the old horse had made drills exact to plan. So close it seemed that horse and man were one. This young horse strained, the boy found he must run. He pulled the reins, a battle there began. The two were etched against the midday sun. The man stepped in, he pushed aside his son and faced the horse. Fists, hooves, like lightning span. So close it seemed that horse and man were one. That boy, a man now, lets his memories run, and when across the bridge of years they span, the two are etched against the setting sun, and his mind's eye, now horse and man are one. I thought I was going to be orphaned that day, facing up to this horse and the hooves going. And dealing with place, and I suppose the most obvious place of all for me to write about would be Maidlass. Maidlass made me. And I was asked to prepare something for the 1798 memorial ritual or whatever that was held in the graveyard in Maidlass on the 4th of July 1998. And it's a ballad-style poem, but it tells the story of Maidlass. Two things. There's a reference in the end to the children of today marching through the field side by side from this hallowed spot. It was delivered in Maidlass Cemetery, but there were children pikemen at the ceremony, and after the ceremony in the cemetery, a new hurling pitch for them was going to be opened or inaugurated at the school in Maidlass. So that's where they'll be marching to at the end of the poem here. And the second point is that the field that the Villanelle is set in was later, it passed from my father to the parish to become the new section of the graveyard. And he is actually buried in that new section of the graveyard, and that's how the poem finishes. Maidlast Cemetery, 4th of July 1998. To this quiet hill the Milesians came, and they looked o'er the fertile plain. Here they lit their ceremonial fire at the feast that they called Beltane. As centuries passed, 'twas a paschal fire, then Celt and Norman were one, when a noble church stood upon the hill in the glow of the setting sun. Then in penal times, when the roof was stripped, for a time people prayed by the fire, but they stole softly back and replaced the slate with straw from the animal's byre. The golden thatch in a place of pride angered the military horde, and so they fired the thatch, cut people down, and laid waste with musket and sword. Then peaceable men were stirred up to rage when they saw their chapel alight, so they shouldered their pikes and they joined Harvey's men to defend their homes and their rights. When the battle was lost, the survivors came home and picked up the pieces again, but remembered the past and passed on to their sons the pride and the loss and the pain. That torch was passed on till it lit freedom's fire, and today we live in its glow. So we honour and praise all those that rest here who had striven that it might be so. We pray that their spirits are now all at peace, as they look down, we hope, with some pride, at the children of freedom who shouldered their pikes as they marched to the field side by side. From this hallowed spot where in 98 the thatch overhead was burned, where the bones of our fathers returned to the earth, 'neath the sod that their ploughshares once turned.
Well, the place I'm going to bring you to is the place with a very august name, the Clonmel District Asylum for the Lunatic Poor. So I'll tell you, you'd have no illusion about yourself if that was your address. And that was the address, so God knows, I'm sure he got absolutely no post, of another uncle of mine, Dan Galvin, and his dates are 1909 to 1930. And I never knew I had this uncle until his name was just mentioned casually by a neighbour who visited us here in Wexford. And I became extremely curious, obviously, and through the Freedom of Information Act was able to piece something of his story together and put a headstone somewhere for him, you know. And anyway, the poem has an epigram quoting the sociologist Patricia O'Sullivan, her book, The Growth of the Lunatic Asylum in Ireland. And she says, Ireland had more people locked away than Stalin's Gulag reign. So we were great at locking people up in various institutions. Every time I pass St. Luke's, insanity had stamped a dreadful expression on their features, observed Dr. O'D, the medical officer. He noted the dulled and immensely sad eyes of the melancholic. I imagine my Uncle Dan, a boy of 18, crouched in the corner in a mildewed cell as the doctor slipped the rusty shutter, recorded epilepsy and mania, hereditary through the female line. The sparse medical records describe a dull and stupid-looking fellow, surly and silent, hurling himself at windows, breaking panes of glass in the day room. His escape bids were very troublesome for staff. 3 weeks short of his 21st birthday, it is recorded the night attendant, Art Foley, found him dead. I look for his ghost every time I pass St. Luke's, the Clonmel District Asylum for the lunatic poor. I feel my uncle's loneliness for the wild woodbine ditches of Whitechurch, the billowing toss of high skies in summer. I imagine a neighbour alerting him when the stream was alive with brown trout, my uncle preparing a makeshift rod. I see him in the exercise yard beating a frenzied circle, missing the white pony looking over the stable door. Hear him scrape his chair to the table where he eats a slop of gruel, remembering the flitch of bacon hooked to the rafters, absorbing the smoky sweetness of the fire, his mother singing as she cut the cabbage, her voice rising and falling, gentle, familiar, powerless. And the next, we bring you to a far nicer place now. That's a fantasy place. The Bridges of Paris, right? And where I grew up in South Tipperary, the big bandsman was Mick Delahunty. The 50s, the 60s, and he was a fabulous character with his orchestra. And nobody who hasn't lived through the bleak, forbidding, harsh Ireland of the 60s, full of admonishment and all the rest of it, can have any idea of the blessed creatures that these bandsmen and women were. You know, they really burst upon the stage and just showed us, you know, how to be free and liberated and all the rest of it. We really are so blessed to have them in our narrative. And in researching for this poem, I listened to an interview with Mick Delahunty, and he said something really interesting, that he received, you know, hundreds of letters very regularly from the ladies. And they were the poor girls who were married now with children, God knows, 11, 12 children probably, in a house with no water, you know, the gin yourself. And they would be lamenting that they couldn't go to the dances anymore. But they used to write to him, I suppose, to maintain some bit of connection. And one of his numbers was fabulous, The Bridges of Paris, you know. And it's written in the voice and persona of one of those women. It nearly broke my heart the other day when I heard Mick Dell on the wireless. His saxophone music enticed me away from the panarashers on the crooker, spirited me under the bridges of Paris. Himself found me with glassy eyes when he came in with the eggs. I told him I'd been chopping onions, but hoped he'd see there wasn't an onion in sight, and that my expression was different. I was a girl again in the Collins Hall, himself all spruce in his sports coat, trying to pluck up the courage to ask if I'd join him for a bottle of lemonade in the mineral bar. I never get to the dances now, with the house full of children. Some Sunday evening, I'd love if he'd ask his mother to sit with the kids so we could take a spin into Clonmel and hear Mick Dell. She'd think me cracked in the head, a flighty piece, fond of the road. The only road I travel now is the one I trudge with message bags and buckets of water. But I keep a pair of new nylons in the drawer, and the good blouse ironed, just in case a miracle might happen. I feel hopeful sometimes when I hear him hum Little Brown Jug, wink at me when the young ones join in the chorus.
Thank you. So we're now moving on to events. We're going to shout into the mic. Yeah. So yeah, just in case you missed, you weren't here, we're responding to a quote from Margaret's selected poems, which is by the American poet Jane Kenyon, who says that one of the functions of poetry is to keep alive the memory of the people, places, and events that shape us. So we're moving on to events now. And this is a poem called 1601, which is an event. And I lived in Kinsale for many years, 1601, the Battle of Kinsale, of course, and etched into memory. But it was also the premiere of Hamlet in England, and I was kind of struck by that coincidence that you had, like, it's considered the greatest play ever written, a flowering of modern English at a time when there's something, that's lost. So it's kind of cosmic view of that, I suppose. 1601. The light of a star that exploded 400 years ago becomes visible to the naked eye. A prince treads the boards. This bodes some strange eruption to our state. The ghost of his father appears, ashen-faced. Just after 4, the second Earl of Essex is executed for treason. Across the Irish Sea, men march down to Cork from Donegal. Blasts from hell. Crops fail worldwide due to a volcano in Peru. The Spanish Armada lies shipwrecked off the Irish coast. The final stone is placed on the cairn of Gaelic rule. Earls take flight for Europe. Thwarted desire, a bloody end. Famine sweeps through Russia. The prince finds himself in a black hole. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. My latest collection called About Blank, and it's kind of a hybrid piece. There's, I suppose it's quite very experimental for me. It moves across kind of narrative poetry, and there's a play in it and a monologue, and it has these sort of mythic dimensions, I suppose. And I was fortunate enough that it was turned into a audio piece, and it has Owen Rowe, great Owen Rowe in it, and Olin Ferreira. Now whenever I read from the book, all I have is Owen's wonderful dulcet tones in the back of my mind. But this is the poem, but it's called The Great Friend, and it's about the Sufi mystic Jalaluddin Rumi. And I suppose this is an event because it's 12th century, 13th century, and it's a time of great change in the West, and a lot of the ideas that came from the Middle East, we forget so much, came through the Islamic culture. So this was a sort of key moment. This is a sort of story of how Rumi really became Rumi. Rumi, a great mystic, also invented the whirling dervishes, the guys who spin around. So this is called The Great Friend. In the autumn of 1244, a young Muslim scholar of Konya met a new arrival who'd been travelling throughout the Middle East. This stranger put a question to the scholar. It remains one of the great mysteries. Whatever the question, the young scholar lost his breath and fainted. When he came round, the two talked and became locked in a stream of endless dialogue. Inseparable, they spoke for days without human need, like two musicians riffing, each one taking over where the other left off, in a state of pure discovery. Late one night, mid-discussion, the friend went to attend a knock at the door and didn't come back. The young scholar fell silent and vowed never to speak again unless his great friend returned. He had fallen into what is known as the deep well of meditation, the narrow tunnel of mortal contemplation. For months, not a word passed his lips. Then, on his darkest night, he looked up and let out a savage howl. As he screamed, he found a new voice forming. The next morning, he headed to the market square and began to speak. Poetry and parables poured out. You are the sky my spirit circles in. My soul is from elsewhere. He started to sway and, outstretching his arms, whirled around, spinning between food stalls, weaving teachings out of chickpeas, forming fables about burnt kebabs. A large crowd gathered. Some started to swoon and dissolve into laughter. Others moaned in ecstasy and cried. One young man began writing his every word down. The Konya scholar had lost all simile and became the thing itself. The lover, the beggar, the parched earth, the unfurling flower. He continued turning into the small hours, his great friend returning through him. mute moon smiling in the wings.
Now moving into the 1960s and still with the meditation and religion in mind here. One of the big thrills we had, and this makes me sound like kind of a bit of a saddo, but when the Pope came on the telly to give his blessing when we were small children, we used to kneel down and get it, and it was very kind of thrilling, you know. Especially us children, you know, we did it. My father used to look at a little bit last night. He had bought the television in 1963 so that we could watch the funeral of President Kennedy, so we still had it. So anyway, Urbi et Orbi, to the city and the world. It was Christmas, or maybe Easter, when the national broadcaster beamed Paul Montini into our kitchen. We knelt with our mother for his blessing in front of the new television. Our father stilled the rolling of the screen while we waited, the red linoleum soft on our knees, the cold of the old floor blocked by the cork underlay, praying for the static snow to settle, the Vatican balcony to appear, and the third Pope of my life so far to raise his hand and chant the holy words. Father marvelled that a blessing could travel from Rome to Balask on waves of electricity, but we silenced his doubts, assured him of our faith in flickering images, and held our plastic rosaries aloft, beads missing, crosses chewed, greedy for the magic from the Pope's right hand. And then I grew up and I discovered boys. It's a little bit shy about reading this one, but I'll read it anyway. This is about chasing after a man, and it's called Parley. That summer, I fell in love with the shirt of sheer white cotton, its wide sleeves held fast by tight cuffs as it billowed over a market stall in the Dandelion Market. And it cost too much, but I handed over lunch money and bus fare because I knew that if I wore a flesh-toned bra underneath and tucked the shirt tails into my blue jeans, I would look like a sexy pirate. I wore it to a party in Rathgar. At the vicar's house there were tray bakes, lemonade and dancing with you, until I feigned fatigue and we retired to a dark corner, my head on your shoulder. I adjusted my chin and watched your face through slit lids, allowed your lips to find mine. You brought me home. I held on tight, lay down on your back when your bike took the corners, inhaled the scent of your shampoo and the oily tang of your biker jacket. I clung to you again when we kissed. You laughed shyly when your jacket left tracings of black wax on my good shirt. And of course I should have kept it, crumpled and unwashed, battened down in an old trunk with the wedding dress and the floral smock. Let its traceries whisper to them and argue that the parley had been wise.
There was a word you didn't read out.
No, I just let it go. It was just the name of the shampoo.
The name of the shampoo.
The name of the shampoo. Expand that.
Oh, we're being very closely monitored.
I want you say you want to take life down along, yeah.
Jean, in her introduction, mentioned that I've been involved in drama, and my debut on stage was in the play Oscuelga, Plúrin Sneachta, which is Snow White, and I played one of the 7 dwarfs. I was about, I'm not 100% sure, I've been unable to trace what year it was, but I think it was about 1955 or 6. I was 7 or 8. And at that time, a few years ago, first, you might remember there being a national festival called the Homecoming, you know, where Ireland was being boosted and trying to attract people. Well, that was a copy of a festival that was held in the 50s called On Toastal. And part of the On Toastal that year that we had the play in Irish was a festival, a competitive festival of children's drama in Gorey, 25 miles or 30 up from where we were. But Maidlass School entered Plúrin Sneachta in that. We all went up on a bus. The title of the poem referring to it is The Dark at the Top of the Stair. Their on-toastal performance over, the children wandered the unfamiliar town. Disregarded as the youngest, or perhaps just forgotten, he found his way back to the hall. Seeking out father and brother on the balcony, he was turned back at the top of the stairs and sat alone in the stalls. He sank into the lonely seat for comfort, was transported by the wondrous spectacle unfolding on the stage. The vivid blue of Cuchulain's tunic burned into his brain. The dark at the top of the stair had opened into a brightness that would stay with him all his life. And remaining in the drama mould, a poem called Bardophile. I became entranced by Shakespeare's work and his language and all the rest of it. There was a competition at lunchtime on RTE1 where John Creedon was doing the programme at that time, and the prize for this competition was a trip to Stratford, and I'd hardly been outside the country at that time. The competition involved English, questions about English language perhaps. One of them was always, what is the opposite of, and they'd give a word. You had to send in a postcard, and postcards were picked at random to go live on the radio. And I found the biggest postcard that I could get. And though I had never been to Stratford, never been hardly been outside Ireland, I had walked on the battlements of Elsinore and made up some other rubbish about, having a stab at Julius Caesar or something like that. Anyway, lo and behold, that card got picked and I was asked. Now, the day before, he'd asked someone what was the opposite of panorama. And I said, I knew that was vista. I was asked what was the opposite of neutral. And I stumbled around and I said, involved. No. The word they were looking for was partisan. Anyway, I did get a poem out of it. I didn't get anything else.
So you didn't go to Stratford?
No, I didn't. Not then, but I have gone since.
Okay.
Yeah. Bardophile. He has done the state some service, but doubts if anyone knows it or cares. Leaving the toilet, he quotes, for this relief much thanks. Not caring if his hearers think Hamlet is just a cigar, or a small village like Maidlass. He regrets that in and since his youth he wasted time, and now that time waste him. He can list the Chamberlain's men, Burbage, Kemp, Armagh and the rest, and knows the Curtain, Fortune and the Globe intimately, though his entire foreign travel comprised one day trip to Fishguard. But every night he checks his small change for portraits of the Queen, to put into his Toby jug for Stratford.
Well, I'm going to pick up on Anne's theme about the Pope. This isn't the Pope, it's a humble clergyman. And again, I write a great deal about my first 20 years of my life were spent in Tipperary. The subsequent 40-something, 42, many, God knows, I've been here in Wexford. But at one stage, a young Jesuit from Chicago came amongst us. Now you can picture 1960s Ireland and the charisma and the charm and the spell that this man would cast. And he came from Chicago to say a funeral mass for his uncle who lived near us. And he presented in a certain way, and a few years later he returned presenting in a very different way. The clergyman visits the young priest, callow, ethereal. My nephew, a Jesuit in Chicago. His aunt's introduction, breathless with pride. We noted his long fingers as he raised the host, thought him a saint, knelt often for the grace of his blessing, stood when he entered the room to honour this young man in black canonicals, the collar a bit loose on his neck. Stout and grey-haired on his return visit, status indeterminate. Told us to call him Tom. Talked vaguely of a sabbatical, wore a flashy tie, cadged cigarettes from my mother when he ran out. No one chanced a blessing from his puffy hands. The aunt said he was like a man on tablets. A tad too fond of the drink. Wondered if he was having a bit of trouble with the prostate or the nerves. The way he was up at all hours, clattering around the kitchen, making tea he never drank, distracting himself with the desolate jabber of late-night radio stations. She marked the calendar for his departure, booked the Hackney well in advance.
We're a little bit over time,
Okay.
but no. I think if a short poem, maybe
Very,
we just finish.
yeah,
But just before we finish up, just to say, thank you so much to Kilmore Quay, to the Right by the Sea Festival for everything. It's been amazing, and thank you to you guys.
Thank you very much, Adam. Yeah. Okay. It's been really okay. Are you sure? Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead,
Okay.
yeah.
Right. Just a short one. Okay. The charity hop. One of my favourite places on earth is charity shops. And I was in a charity shop the other day. It was in Drogheda, and it was one of the smelly varieties that you wouldn't be too fond of, frequenting. But anyway, there was an old beat up piano there with broken toys and all the rest on top of it. But something wonderful happened. And the epigram from Cervantes, he of the Tilting at Windmills, where there is music, there can be no evil. When the girl with blue hair jingled the decrepit old piano to life in the charity shop, we lifted our faces from tired rummaging amongst rails of deadbeat blouses. We might as well have been in Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, Nashville, as she plucked out the ragtime classic, Scott Joplin's Entertainer. We picked up the tune, two-stepped to her rhythms, swayed to this offbeat honky-tonk. The girl with blue hair flashed a smile of studs, bowed as we applauded her performance. Blue kisses from tattooed fingertips to the old man who raised his frayed cap and called her a great girl entirely.